Hi, my name is Christoph Rogersen and welcome to the presentation of my thesis named Dynamic versus Static User Interface. Which one is easier to learn and will make you more efficient? Here you can see the structure of the thesis, starting off with the introduction, which have a background where you can find information about the client, the problem that the client have, also the purpose, and you can find the scope. Next you will find the questions to be answered, the method to answer the questions, the literature review, and where you can find information about basic or fundamental concepts discussed in this study. Analysis and results, conclusions, future work, references, and also an appendix with requirements from the customer. Now the background to this study starts with the client ICS, which is a small company with about 7 employees who has its focus on equipment for material testing. They have a wide variety of different equipment and different types of testing. A big portion of the services they provide is calibration of these equipment, and the calibration is mostly performed on site at the customer site. They do this by using a system they developed themselves that consists of Excel documents. In these documents they enter in customer information, they acquire measurement data, and eventually it will end up as a calibration certificate. Now this system has been around for about 15 years and it's very complicated and hard to maintain, and today there's basically only one person left that can maintain this system, and this leaves ICS very exposed. This have led them to the conclusion that they need to find a replacement system or find a way to develop a new system. So what this study has done is it has investigated if a web-based system could be a possible replacement and if it can meet the functional requirements stated in the appendix. By creating a prototype with a web-based system, and this study has evaluated basically if it can meet the same functionality as the current system. And also during these user tests it also evaluated the dynamic user interface of the prototype and compare it to the static user interface of the current system, and see how these different types of interfaces affect the learnability and efficiency for the users. Now the scope of this study is not to create a fully functional system that they can use for as a replacement, but rather it just creates a prototype where you can test the functionality of a web-based system and also test the dynamic user interface and compare that to the static user interface. The questions that I've been trying to answer in this study is been divided into 2 parts. One have its focus on functionality, whereas the other 2 questions have its their focus on the user interface. On the functionality, we have the question: will a web-based system meet the requirements the client has regarding the functionality? And this basically means, can a web-based system do all the stuff that the current system can? And on the user interface focus, we have: how will a dynamic user interface affect efficiency of fieldwork? will a dynamic user interface make it easier to learn? And by answering research question number 1, ICS will have a better knowledge on if a web-based system could be a good path for them to follow when a new system needs to be developed. And by answering research question number 2 and 3, you could understand if a dynamic user interface will make it easier for a user to learn the system. So the hypothesis here is that the dynamics in a dynamic system could better instruct the user and guide them to different steps within a task, and in that way make it easier for the user to learn. Whereas a static user interface might be more efficient to use, since you don't have to go through all these different steps. And to answer these questions, a prototype have been developed, and it has been done so by using Vue, modern day framework, and it has been developed as a single page application. More about that in section 4. And on top of having the prototype, there have also been user testing. Now there have been 2 types of user testing that took place in 2 different locations at 2 different times with 2 different types of users. When measuring efficiency, the users have been experienced in the current system and was actually introduced to the prototype. This is because you want to have a user with good knowledge about the system in order to measure the efficiency. Otherwise, you would introduce the learnability aspects as well. The users was mainly ICS personnel, and the metrics was the total time of the calibration and the number of errors made. When you look at the learnability aspect, you do not want the users to be efficient because you want to have them at a novice state, because that's how you usually learn a new system. And this is true for both the current system and the prototype. During the user testing, the tests have followed a question suggestion protocol, which basically means that the users will have to try and figure out how to perform the task, in this case a calibration, and if they get problems along the line, they will have to ask a coach that is standing by their side. And during these tests, the time it takes to complete the task will be recorded, along with the number of interactions with the coach. And if we look at the results for these tests, you can see that when we tested the efficiency, the difference between the current system and the prototype wasn't that big, but the majority of the users was actually faster with the current system rather than the prototype. But they had they were more prone to make errors with the current system. If we look at the learnability, we can see that the users was way faster using the prototype and needed assistance many times less. And when we look at the requirements from the client, we find that all of the functional requirements was met, and the user was able to perform the calibration successfully. Now, if we analyze these results, we can find that a web-based system would be a good solution for ICS as a replacement for the current system, and would actually add some extra value to it, since if you have a system developed with well-known techniques or well-known languages, programming languages, it's way easier to find other developers that can help maintain the system. So that doesn't make the company so reliant on key personnel, basically. The efficiency was not increased with the prototype. The users was on average 3% slower using the prototype, but did make errors much less. Now the errors in this case will actually affect the time it takes to complete the tasks, since if an error is made, then they need to go back and basically correct the mistake they just made. And that will eventually affect the overall efficiency, which means that the time it takes to complete the task is actually the primary metric in this case. But the errors is actually important, because it's not always the case that you find the errors while you're doing the calibration. It might be cases where you do not find the error and the error follows along down the line, causing big problems further down the line. If we look at learnability and analyze the results, we find that the users on average was way faster using the prototype and needed assistance way less. This helps to answer the question if a dynamic user interface is easier to learn, which I would argue that it is. And when we come to the conclusions, we can see that a web-based system would very well be a good solution as a replacement for the current system, and a dynamic user interface do make it easier to learn, while it does not necessarily make it users more efficient. It is important to mention in this study, the number of users that was used for the testing was not very high. It was only 3 users for each test. In the literature, we find that you should at least have 5 users. But for the user tests that I did, I needed to have users with calibration experience, since calibration is a pretty complex task to perform. I did not want to have anyone with without any calibration experience, because that would affect the results too much and would make it very difficult to compare the different test results. And the personnel that I had available was under a very high workload and did not have the time or the resources to do these user tests, basically. If I were to redo this whole thing, I would probably schedule user tests way earlier in order to secure the users for the user tests. This was everything I had. Thank you very much.